This Week in Economics on the 11th of May 2014. Numbers man here. I'd like to take this time to wish all the mothers out there happy Mother's Day 2014 also. We'll have, after our part is done here, an edited version of the testimony of the Fed Chair, Dr. Janet Yellen, before a joint committee of the Congress, House and Senate. This is Humphrey Hopkins' joint report on the U.S. economy, and she will explain the Fed's position and where the U.S. economy is at this particular point and where it is headed to. We'll start with a study here, a very interesting study. We read the whole study, but this is the summary from the Bloomberg people, and we'll just scan it basically. This is by Victoria Stilwell. Black mobility belies U.S. civil rights hope as milestone nears. Nonetheless, a half century after the Civil Rights Act, commitment to the federal government to narrowing the racial divide, African Americans are still being left behind. African Americans remain less likely to climb the income ladder and more likely to drop than whites, that's according to research published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. It also found that African Americans will probably continue to suffer from more lower mobility unless the causes of the disparities are addressed. Such stagnation isn't just troubling in the framework of American history, it is bad for the economy. That is from Richard Reeves, a fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institute. If African Americans don't have an opportunity to rise, income inequality will become more severe, labor markets more ineffective, and the welfare rolls are burdened. Well, there are a few welfare rolls to be burdened these days. That is it. It is nice to look at Obama and the higher profile Americans, African Americans who have done well, but the U.S. is still very far from being a post-racial society. That's from Dr. Reeves. Said in an interview, "We can't afford to maintain such sharp divide in the life chances of African and white Americans." Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act on June the 2nd and of 1964. That's what we're moving into 50 years there. Forbidding discrimination on base of race and sex in hiring and achievement and firing, as well as banning segregation in public accommodations. And a little chart you'll see here. This is a Bloomberg visual, but if you look at just the rate of redundancy or unemployment rates, that's of April 2014, 11.6% for African Americans and 5.3% for white Americans. At 11.6, the unemployment rate for African Americans April was more than double, and no doubt about it. The spread is little changed from where it was in 1990. The median income of African American households was $33,221, about 58% of the $57,009 for whites. In 1972, the comparable figures were $5,000, come a long ways, $938, and $10,318. So in other words, in 1972, remember we were out campaigning for Dr. George McGovern of South Dakota, and at that particular time it was still the same percentage that we have now. In other words, we hear about the disparity between the earning power of women, roughly 77 cents, but again, at about 58%, so not quite 60% there. So it is a bad news. In 1972, if you look at it, it was less than 10 years after President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Bhaskara Zander is a senior economist and researcher, and I probably butchered his name, and research advisor at the Chicago Fed, who wrote the bank study, found that 50% of African children were born between the late 50s and the early 80s who lived in households at the bottom 20% of income scale remain the same relative position in adulthood. For whites, the compatible figure was 26%. Of course, we're taking into consideration more whites than African Americans out there, but a very large percentage of their social assistance, with African Americans more likely than whites to receive federal help, boosting mobility, would also save taxpayers money. Some 27% of African Americans receive benefits from 3 or more government entitlement programs in their lifetime, compared with 14% of whites. That is a study from the Pew Research Center in Washington in 2012. Whether you care about macroeconomic growth or global competitiveness, or whether you just have a basic notion of the United States as a place where people have equality of opportunity, in either case you should be concerned about mobility, and absolutely should be concerned about the gap between black and white. That's from Aaron Curry, who directed the Pew study. The disadvantages of growing up in poor neighborhoods explains up to a third of the racial gap among those siblings. Down the income scale, sliding down the income scale. That's the Pew study there by New York University. That was 2009. Associate professor there, Patrick Sharkey, found residents in those areas may have less political influence, no doubt about that, and have less today than his study, and more trouble finding or maintaining a job, and more exposure to crime. Poverty rates. Half of African American children live in communities where poverty rate is greater than 20%, compared to 14% of white children, according to a study by the N.E. Casey Foundation of Baltimore. They are based in Baltimore, Maryland. Marindi's study didn't try to identify the causes of these disparities, and economists usually would not. Test scores reflect such things as how much parents read to their children, the quality of the schools, peer influence rather than inherent ability. He said that argues for intervening in early life, according to Zander. In addition, having 2 parents in the household, as only 37 of African American children do, improves upward mobility relative to whites. That's again from Zander's research. 77% of white children live in a 2-parent household. I would question that with high divorce rates as we have these days. At the same time, living with just one adult didn't cause their children to be less well off than their parents, the study found. Family composition here. In the District of Columbia, African Americans make up half of the population, higher than in any U.S. State. Even so, whites make up 81% of the top 1% of earners. That's because the majority of people in the district are employed by the federal government, or they are contractors there too. If it were a state, Washington would rank as the worst minority representation in the top percentile. That's a Bloomberg ranking of there. African households earning a share of white households in 1967. Now that would be 3 years after President Johnson. It was 55%. In 2011, it was 59%, or 4% there. The exceptions, well, we'll go into who the exceptions are. And then they point to Michigan and the ban on affirmative action there. And I would also add in California, there's also that situation. The Chicago study points out, I think people have this reaction, well, slavery is over, civil rights happened in the 60s, why do we still have affirmative action? If we had a real rapid rate of intergenerational mobility, that might be a reasonable point. Now, I read the study, and that was constantly the theme there, intergenerational mobility. It's about 18 pages long, and if you go to the Bloomberg, we posted this article on our Facebook and our Twitter feeds there. Nonetheless, Victoria Stilwell, she's in Washington, and she can be contacted. But the intergenerational mobility is just simply not there in most instances. It's an unfortunate situation. It's almost like a lost generation of African Americans. One observation we've made, anecdotal obviously, but many African Americans that were recipients of various things, affirmative action, better education through the National Science Foundation loans, Pell loans, etc., that was not passed on to their offsprings. Some were, some were not, due to various situations. We have a large number of African American college graduates that are not employed, are underemployed. So that's the situation. I was talking to a young man last night at the market that worked his way through university and was still working at the market 1.5 years after he graduated with a political science degree. He was not an African American, but this just shows the nature of the economy. And when you have this type of economy out there, African Americans will obviously suffer most. In California, the affirmative action program, as far as the education of doctors, lawyers, and whomever else, suffers. The law school at Berkeley has fewer people of color, with the exception of Asians, and it is so bad that the Latinos have to go to Mexico to get their medical degrees. And so what's basically happening, too few medical professions to service the ever-enlarging Latino population, especially in California, is a chronic problem. And when you have this in various schools, you will have less and less in those professions. And in the law profession, it's very, very important to have an adequate number of legal advocates in your particular community. Let's go to some other news here. Check on our time. We had to get the study in, and we'll make some time for Dr. Yellen. The inflation rate in China has slowed. We'll just get this from Bloomberg, and we'll go to consumer inflation in China moderated to an 18-month low. They had been working on this. The consumer price index rose 1.8% as from the Bureau in April. The Bureau of Statistics in Beijing. That compares with the medium estimate, this is from Bloomberg now, of 2.1% and a 2.4% gain in March. The producer index fell 2 points. The 26-month decline after 2.3 the previous month. This is very important, and China is going the right way, pulling some of the air out of the bag, so to speak. There's room for policy easing in China. There's no doubt about that. That was from the Bartlett PC in Chang Jun in Hong Kong. There's clearly downward pressure on property prices that needs to be in China, and overall inflation. If real estate prices keep falling in the second half, there will be more room for easing, and including a cut in bank reserves. Now, the Chinese central bank has said they will resist that. They're not cutting that. Decline in prices of vegetable and pork, very important for the people in China, with the benchmark Shanghai composite index, composite index fell 0.2% at the close, while the index of 300, that's a sub gauge of industrial shares, was down. That was 0.2 and down 0.3. The Chinese Premier Ling was speaking in Nigeria, reiterated that China had the competence and capacity to achieve the economic goals of the year. Their analysis expansion of 7.3% in 2004 would be the slowest in 24 years, based on medium estimates by Bloomberg. But we see that as in line with Chinese policy. The 8, 9, and 10% were relatively high of growth there, and especially growth in the speculative side of the economy, real estate, for instance, and the acceleration of food prices, which hurt ordinary people across the vast territory of China. Inflation remains at least 1% below the government's full-year target. Their target is 3.5%, which is not bad in an emerging country. Emerging countries generally as a whole can go as high as 5 or even 6%. Now in the U.S., for instance, 3.5% would not be bad. It would increase employment possibilities. The Fed target around 2.5%. You see that's basically 10%. Food prices rose 2.3%. We'd like to see that go continuously down after 4.1% gain in March. Non-food inflation was 1.6% compared with 1.5%. Wait a minute here. Yeah, 1.5% the previous month. And also back to the, we believe it's time to contemplate easing a monetary policy. That's not going to happen. That was from Lu Li Gang, chief of Greater China economist of Australian New Zealand banking group in Hong Kong. A lot of influence peddlers in Hong Kong don't believe that. The producer price index, compared with the medium estimate of economists for 1.9% fall, extends the longest stretch of decline since 31-month slide in 1997. Coal producer. China's coal energy company last month reported a drop of about 67%, good for the environment, in net income there, and warned of a decline in the first half profit due to prolonged low coal prices. Well, that should happen. China has to go to what they call now alternative fuels, no doubt about it. Coal is the most dirty fuel out there. The coal lobby has been raising hell in the U.S. in certain states, Pennsylvania, of course, West Virginia, and those states. But coal mining is, as they say, old coal. It is obviously one of the fossil fuels, been around very, very long time. But going to wind and solar power, China is very big in solar power, very big in wind power. are some alternatives there. There used to be an opinion, I guess you'd call it, or assumption perhaps, that industrialization by any means would lift all boats. That is still, you hear that in the U.S. With the Republicans in Congress open up everything. In other words, open up the seas, the lakes, the rivers, anything else you can think of, the national forests, etc., for oil production. Well, the problem is with the production in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and specifically in the Balkan area of North and South Dakota, that is not necessary. The capacity of the oil refining operations in Louisiana and Texas, they really can't literally find enough workers. So many things have changed there. We'll go now to the BBC and pick up a couple of things here. Well, we'll get this while we're here. Apple is wanting to buy Dr. Dredge's earphone company, basically, after a $3.2 billion deal there. The company founded by Dr. Dredge, Beats Music. They have a line of designer headsets, you call them. We used to call them earphones, but anyway, that run roughly close to close to $500. But now they have a Beats music service. For $10 a month, you can sign up, and as they say, you can be streamed on tablets, web browsers, smartphones, whatever, and get the latest music. There are other services that do that, including Apple, and Apple is trying to hit off some of that. iTunes, and of course we're on iTunes. There you can download us for free, but I think costs you still $1. But that some people are a little reluctant to pay the buck, so to speak, so you don't have as much of the buck going there. Let's get one over here, and then we will go to the BBC. Putin going after Chinese money to sustain sluggish Russian economy. Plans to open the door to Chinese money. Of course, the U.S. door is closing. And you now will see the Russian Federation become much more closely aligned with China. And that is probably a situation you'll see more and more of. The two economies working together. Let's see, Eagler Development, that's one of their developments there. That's a coal development, not a very good example of things going on. To build a bridge across the Straits of Kherson to the Crimeas. One has to understand that the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, or Russian Republic, is vast. So you have a vast operation there that borders many different places. So you'll see that. The bond rate, the 3-month is at 0.2%. The 2-year bond is at 0.3%, and the 10-year is at 2.62% there. So that's a little bit of what's going on. The federal fund rate's at 0.7, and the prime is at 3.25. There, and the 30-year fix is at 4.22. Now let's go to the BBC. We've done what we could do with the U.S. Situation. There, Michelle Obama, incidentally, did the presidential talk about the situation of the schoolgirls kidnapped in Nigeria. The Nigerian government evidently has 2 divisions devoted to that. There are other special type divisions from various other places there also. The ad firms, Publius and The other one, the largest in the world, have called off their merger. One of the big questions come flying up here as we open up the BBC's part of the business. There, let me just get back to. Okay, we'll get to it in just a sec here. I keep passing by the business thing. They've changed the menu on me from time to time. Here we go. And we'll fly right through this very quickly. The Pfizer people, U.S. government face concern about job loss. This is Pfizer combining some of their branches here in the U.S. Governors of Maryland and let's see, Delaware written to Pfizer. Job worries there. Some of these companies that in AstraZeneca employs 3,100 workers there, and 2,600 in Delaware. So that was a company they were combining with there. This is not a very good article we are reading here, but the pre-tax inversion, Pfizer could pay the Ewing Corporation tax rate of 20% rather than 35%. It applies in the U.S. if it bought AstraZeneca. So this is a very big question there. If Pfizer buys it, what would happen to these U.S. jobs? Well, they would, as one would say, would go the way of many other things in the U.S. Little job growth in Canada. We'll do it, and then we'll go ahead and do our numbers here and go to the report of Dr. Yellen. Nonetheless, Canadian economy shed 29,000 jobs in April. Employment fell in Newfoundland and in Quebec and New Brunswick, but rose in Saskatchewan. The labor force participation rate fell to 66.1% from 66.5% last year. Quebec fell 32,000 jobs in April, and New Brunswick 54 fewer jobs there. So you can see the Canadian economy is suffering, and this is this old question that we had about the rise of the Keystone Pipeline and various other oil developments there. Canada has been a beneficiary of these and has been expanding their economy. And I don't see now the report here from Calgary, where much of this activity is going on, but just went very quickly to the report. And let's see if we can find it here. Year over year rose 0.8%. The number of people working 149,000. There it went up. Employment declined among women 25 to 54, youth 15 to 24, and the unemployment rate here. Let's see. We talked about the participation rate already. The unemployment rate was 6% in April and down 0.2%, 12 months. In the U.S., the rate fell 1.2. In other words, it's 6.3 in the U.S. as opposed in Canada of 6%. A little bit better, but very, very small. Population employment declined in Quebec and most of the Atlantic coast, which is the most populous coast in Canada. Compared with 12 months earlier, the participation rate fell in both Canada and the U.S. It's a good comparison here. In Canada, the participation rate declined by 0.4%, 61.1%, and in the U.S., the rate fell by 0.6% to 62%. So some of the things here for this particular study. This is from the Bureau in Canada. Let's go to do the numbers now, and long overdue, literally. These are Friday, unless otherwise noted, as one would say, and unless we say they're in the negative, they will obviously be positive. And there's nothing but red ink here. The FTSE was down 24.68. The DAC in Frankfurt was down 25.96. In Paris, 29.96. In Brussels, 0.91. In Madrid, 104. In Johannesburg, they were down also on Friday, 174.50. In Bombay, 650.19. In the positive, in Karachi, down 27.51. Down in Lahore, 18.48. 9.1 in Colombo, and in Tehran on Wednesday, 36.1. In Sydney, down 13.90. The Nikkei was up 35.81, and Hang Seng in Hong Kong 25.87. They were down in Shanghai 4.14. The Dow 32.37, the Nasdaq 20.37, and the Merck 2.85. In San Pablo, they were down 22.03, and in Mexico 18.80 in the negative area. Very quick look at commodities here, and see where the oil pricing is. Crude. The benchmark, it was down 10 cents at 107.97, and the spot at 108 and 30 cents. It was actually up 52 cents. West Texas crude was down 15 cents, resting at $100.11. T-Boone Pickens is still happy. You remember the $15 a barrel oil. Dubai gold down 50 cents at $1,289.50. And corn was down $8.25. So that does it for commodity pricing. It'll do it for old numbers man. For those in business, make next week a productive one. For the consumer, keep your eyes on the prize. And for the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Good day.
Janet Yellen is chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. She also serves as chair of the Federal Open Market Committee. Prior to her appointment as chair, Dr. Yellen served as vice chair of the Board of Governors. She is professor emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, where she was a professor of business and professor of economics, has been a faculty member for over 30 years. Dr. Yellen has served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and is president and chief executive officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. She also served as an economist with the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors and on the faculty of the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Yellen graduated summa cum laude from Brown University with a degree in economics and received her PhD in economics from Yale University. Chairman Yellen, welcome to today's hearing.
Thank you very much, Chairman Brady. Chairman Brady, Vice Chair Klobuchar, and other members of the committee, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the current economic situation and outlook, along with monetary policy, before turning to some issues regarding financial stability. The economy has continued to recover from the steep recession of 2008 and 2009. Real gross domestic product growth stepped up to an average annual rate of about 3.25% over the second half of last year, a faster pace than in the first half and during the preceding 2 years. Although real GDP growth is currently estimated to have paused in the first quarter of this year, I see that pause as mostly reflecting transitory factors, including the effects of the unusually cold and snowy winter weather. With the harsh winter behind us, many recent indicators suggest that a rebound in spending and production is already underway, putting the overall economy on track for solid growth in the current quarter. One cautionary note, though, is that readings on housing activity, a sector that has been recovering since 2011, have remained disappointing so far this year and will bear watching. Conditions in the labor market have continued to improve. The unemployment rate was 6.3% in April, about 1.25 percentage points below where it was a year ago. Moreover, gains in payroll employment averaged nearly 200,000 jobs per month over the past year. During the economic recovery so far, payroll employment has increased by about 8.5 million jobs since its low point, and the unemployment rate has declined about 3.75 percentage points since its peak. While conditions in the labor market have improved appreciably, they're still far from satisfactory. Even with its recent declines, the unemployment rate continues to be elevated. Moreover, both the share of the labor force that has been unemployed for more than 6 months and the number of individuals who work part-time but would prefer a full-time job are at historically high levels. In addition, most measures of labor compensation have been rising slowly, another signal that a substantial amount of slack remains in the labor market. Inflation has been quite low, even as the economy has continued to expand. Some of the factors contributing to the softness in inflation over the past year, such as the declines in non-oil import prices, will probably be transitory. Importantly, measures of longer-run inflation expectations have remained stable. That said, the Federal Open Market Committee recognizes that inflation persistently below 2%, the rate that the committee judges to be most consistent with its dual mandate, could pose risks to economic performance, and we are monitoring inflation developments closely. Looking ahead, I expect that economic activity will expand at a somewhat faster pace this year than it did last year, that the unemployment rate will continue to decline gradually, and that inflation will begin to move up toward 2%. A faster rate of economic growth this year should be supported by reduced restraint from changes in fiscal policy, gains in household net worth from increases in home prices and equity values, affirming in foreign economic growth, and further improvements in household and business confidence as the economy continues to strengthen. Moreover, U.S. financial conditions remain supportive of growth in economic activity and employment. As always, considerable uncertainty surrounds this baseline economic outlook. Currently, one prominent risk is that adverse developments abroad, such as heightened geopolitical tensions or an intensification of financial stresses in emerging market economies, could undermine confidence in the global economic recovery. Another risk, domestic in origin, is that the recent flattening out in housing activity could prove more protracted than currently expected rather than resuming its earlier pace of recovery. Both of these elements of uncertainty will bear close observation. Turning to monetary policy, the Federal Reserve remains committed to policies designed to restore labor market conditions and inflation to levels consistent with those that the committee judges to be consistent with its dual mandate. As always, our policy will continue to be guided by the evolving economic and financial situation, and we will adjust the stance of policy appropriately to take account of changes in the economic outlook. In light of the considerable degree of slack that remains in labor markets and continuation of inflation below the committee's 2% objective, a high degree of monetary accommodation remains warranted. With the federal funds rate, our traditional policy tool, near zero since late 2008, we have relied on two less conventional tools to provide support for the economy: asset purchases and forward guidance. And because these policy tools are less familiar, we've been especially attentive in recent years to the need to communicate to the public about how we intend to employ our policy tools in response to changing economic circumstances. Our current program of asset purchases began in September 2012, when the recovery had weakened and progress in the labor market had slowed. And we said that our intention was to continue the program until we saw a substantial improvement in the outlook for the labor market. By December 2013, the committee judged that the cumulative progress in the labor market warranted a modest reduction in the pace of asset purchases. At the first 3 meetings this year, our assessment was that there was sufficient underlying strength in the broader economy to support ongoing improvement in labor market conditions, so further measured reductions in asset purchases were appropriate. I should stress that even as the committee reduces the pace of its purchases of longer-term securities, it is still adding to its holdings, and those sizable holdings continue to put significant downward pressure on longer-term interest rates, support mortgage markets, and can contribute to favorable conditions in broader financial markets. Our other important policy tool in recent years has been forward guidance about the likely path of the federal funds rate as the economic recovery proceeds. Beginning in December 2012, the committee provided threshold-based guidance that turned importantly on the behavior of the unemployment rate. As you know, at our March 2014 meeting, with the unemployment rate nearing the threshold that had been laid out earlier, we undertook a significant review of our forward guidance. While indicating that the new guidance did not represent a shift in the FOMC's policy intentions, the committee laid out a fuller description of the framework that will guide its policy decisions going forward. Specifically, the new language explains that as the economy expands further, the committee will continue to assess both the realized and spreads have continued to narrow, and underwriting standards have loosened further. While some financial intermediaries have increased their exposure to duration and credit risk recently, these increases appear modest to date, particularly at the largest banks and life insurers. More generally, valuations for the equity market as a whole and other broad categories of assets, such as residential real estate, remain within historical norms. In addition, bank holding companies have improved their liquidity positions and raised capital ratios to levels significantly higher than prior to the financial crisis. For the financial sector more broadly, leverage remains subdued, and measures of short-term funding continue to be far below levels seen before the financial crisis. The Federal Reserve has also taken a number of regulatory steps, mainly in conjunction with other federal agencies, to continue to improve the resiliency of the financial system. Most recently, the Federal Reserve finalized a rule implementing Section 165 of the Dodd-Frank Act to establish enhanced prudential standards for large banking firms in the form of risk-based and leveraged capital, liquidity, and risk management requirements. In addition, the rule requires large foreign banking organizations to form a U.S. intermediate holding company, and it imposes enhanced prudential requirements for these intermediate holding companies. Looking forward, the Federal Reserve is considering whether additional measures are needed to further reduce the risks associated with large, interconnected financial institutions. While we've seen substantial improvements in labor market conditions and the overall economy since the financial crisis and severe recession, we recognize that more must be accomplished. Many Americans who want a job are still unemployed. Inflation continues to run below the FOMC's longer-run objective, and work remains to strengthen our financial system. I will continue to work closely with my colleagues and others to carry out the important mission that the Congress has given the Federal Reserve. Thank you. I will be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to get a clear picture of the Fed's comprehensive exit strategy in a number of areas.